So this is the third segment in a four-part session or series of webinars that we're putting on all about getting your data healthy, creating good records, keeping data healthy, and why that's important. This is a topic, the publication metadata to enhance discovery, purchase, and use of your content. This is an issue that's near and dear to my heart. Because I have, as I said in my introduction, I've worked with metadata and trying to help publishers better describe and structure data for a very long time now, and I know what the importance of it is. And we're hoping that we can share some knowledge about the industry, general changes that publishers should be aware of, and then provide some practical information, some strategies and tactics that can be employed to help improve content-level metadata. Take a look at our agenda. What I really want to cover today is talk about what's changing in the landscape of discovery and collection development, and why does it matter to publishers? I would like to provide everyone with a brief overview of what kind of discovery platforms are out there and discovery layers, talk about a few industry initiatives surrounding publication metadata, and then, as I said, provide some strategies and tactics, identify some potential pitfalls in working with data, and then we're going to briefly mention Ringgold's ProtoView service, which we've talked about just a little bit in each of the sessions. But we're going to start with the general concept of the changing landscape of discovery and acquisitions and why this is really important. This is the market who we're trying to sell to. And let's face it, life was a lot easier. There's a lot less complexity out there when we were publishing and selling print books. We've all seen in the last decade the number of available formats and platforms where we can deliver content has multiplied, and with it, the burden on publishers has increased to meet those the demands and needs of those platforms in order to get content into the hands of people who are interested in buying and using it. So as I get into here, something I'm going to talk about, and this is different than what we've talked about in the past with respect to Ringgold's data services and the kind of data governance policies that should be included or adhered to in order to get the best result, because we're talking about content, which is really the third leg of the stool of entities that we've been talking about, describing people, places, and publications. And in the prior sessions of these webinars, we've talked a lot about the internal benefits that can be gained from good data governance and having clean data and being able to create a benefit inside the walls of a publishing house. But when we're talking about publications, and I want to be very broad in this sense, so when we're talking about publications, we're really talking about books and ebooks, journals, articles, chapters, anything, and really I probably should have included databases on here as well, anything that's a deliverable to the market. And one of the things that I think is important to emphasize here is the importance on creating good quality data for publications purely on the basis that it is outbound. It will work with other systems. It will be consumed by other systems. The fields will be indexed. It's important that a very high standard is applied to data that's going outside of your walls so it works well within the supply chain. And part of that is the concept of promoting those titles or making them more visible to users and those who might purchase the publication. And that's a little bit of a different concept than what we've talked about prior. Normally, I don't think people necessarily associate Ringgold with providing promotional services. So the term promotion caused Christine and Jean and I to have this, heated debate. I'll say it wasn't really, but we had a good time saying, we really need to clarify this point. And Christine really called me out and said, I think, that when we say things like promotion and in the context of data, it's confusing at best, I think is what you said, Christine.
And I think what, just to clarify, I always think of making content discoverable and easily findable in the supply chain, wherever your users are. That's kind of I think of that as like the third leg of, the bigger umbrella of promotion. There's traditional marketing, traditional sales, and now there's this new element that we all need to pay attention to and be mindful of, and that is making sure our content that we've advertised and tried to sell and tried to promote to libraries is actually discoverable by them. So I see this as like the third leg of the stool.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point. So I think what we've really seen is a huge emphasis on the data that, as I said earlier, is outbound from a publisher into the market in terms of being the representation, the technical representation, if you will, of your product into the supply chain, meaning not just the people who are buying, but the people who are actually using your content as well. So bear in mind when we talk about promotion, what we're really talking about is making sure that all of your titles get a good start in life, and I'll touch on that again in a second because of the importance of your data in the discovery network and search engines to expose your content for use. So, and I'm going to start off with a warning, and this is really one of the things I'd like people to take away is that the lack of high-quality information reduces the likelihood of content to be discovered. It seems really obvious, but I'm going to share some results from studies that have been conducted in the industry later on that really drive this point home, that the importance of attending to the basic details can make a big difference in terms of how many units are actually requested for sale or use. So I like this slide to put in there because it's a bit of a shock to say content isn't king. Well, what I'm really trying to get at here is that metadata is really the ruler of the realm when it comes to getting a user's attention. As I use the term, a technical representation of the product. It's not advertising per se, but it's a much more authoritative elevation of content to users. And that is providing good quality data to users really constitutes the foundation of an effective promotion of the title. The third bullet point here is something that we'll talk about throughout the presentation about using narrative descriptions for content. Again, this is quite different than what Ringgold normally does with respect to data governance and applying unique identifiers to discrete data elements, but is just as important because when content goes out, it's evaluated by users who may not be familiar with the work and need something that is not only capable of being indexed by search engines and discovery layers, but also accessible to human users of those systems. Researchers and patrons who are searching are heavily influenced by having a brief description associated with that title. And so this is where I often say Book News did a fantastic job for 35 years of creating brief abstracts about titles and putting that out where into relevant channels, really targeting the people who matter most and who are interested in scholarly works. That type of metadata, descriptive data, has become more important than ever as user behaviors have really changed, and that's what we're going to get into. Before I do, though, I often use the analogy of publishers as parents and really have to care for their works by getting them off to a good start in life, and that really starts with metadata. And metadata, used to be cooped up in card catalogs, but it's a very different thing now. It gets exposed to the market, usually originating with the publisher or a partner of the publisher who's creating metadata on their behalf. And then once it enters the market, it's touched by intermediaries and users on which metrics are applied with respect to how much use does a particular database, journal, book receive. And that feeds back into analytics and reporting to those people making buying decisions that are having an influence that we've never really seen before. And I'm going to touch on that a little bit more, but I really wanted to leave you with the idea that the overall health of a work is going to be determined by the start that it gets, that really begins with the descriptive data about that title, and that data does grow, takes on that life of its own in the market, and will grow over time. So having a good foothold in the market with respect to a representation of a work is the most basic place to start in order to get it exposed and to make sure that presence is a high quality and persistent presence in the supply chain. Data about titles lives for a very long time in these databases, and so it's really important to put as much and have as much control over it as you possibly can at the beginning of of its life. So this slide helps me illustrate some things that I want to share about the changes in the industry that are really important. It's a bit of a history lesson, a timeline, if you will, of the evolution of what's happened with search and discovery. And I'll begin in the past where librarians made the real decisions about what was going to be purchased and how it would be presented to users. That has gradually migrated to a world where the consumers of that information, the researchers, patrons, are having a much greater influence on decisions made about how collections are developed. So just quickly, I can go back. In early days, card catalogs and holdings about print books and journals were really all that existed and were confined to the walls of a library. And as we've moved forward in time, information has just become more interlinked, more accessible through online interfaces. OPACs created the ability for interlibrary loan to have an impact on how many copies were being purchased. There was the ability to see what other libraries held, so you weren't necessarily an acquisitions librarian wasn't duplicating something that wasn't necessarily going to be used all that much. That's just progressed through time, where consortia is having more of an influence. Web searching began competing with internal library resources. The data that described a work was accessible outside of the library all of a sudden. Models began being experimented with. EBL was the pioneer in this respect, with nonlinear lending, being able to provide access to titles in a just-in-time basis and rather than purchase renting content. Some of these models have stuck and others have been discarded. But nonetheless, technology has progressed and user behavior has really dictated the state of the world today, where on the final bullet here, I have an acronym. WSDS stands for Web Scale Discovery Services, and I'm going to touch on that as one of the most important things that's developing in our industry that publishers really need to be aware of when building a plan to describe content. And right now, some of the other things that are really changing in the world with respect to user behavior is an expectation of instant gratification, being able to search for something that may be in the library, may not be owned yet, but being able to put in a request. And we refer to this as this shift that we're seeing in libraries to a just-in-time model rather than just-in-case. So whereas subject librarians used to purchase titles based on areas of interest, subjects, often validated by the particular publisher that it was coming from, that world is really going away rather quickly. And moving to this demand-driven acquisition model where users are presented not only with resources that are already available to the library or through a library, but also content that would be appropriate for use but has not yet been purchased, and waiting for a user to actually say, yes, I want this particular item, and the technology is in place now to facilitate that request and deliver it directly to the patron. The result has been increasing complexity in the supply chain, and some of what we want to talk about is not only how are these things going to affect publishers, but what can you do about it to adapt your processes to these changes. And I'm not sure if I've left anything out here that you wanted to mention, Christine, about this move to patrons really having an influence on buying decisions.
Yeah, I think, we're all seeing in all corners of the industry a move towards not only, data-driven decisions. They want to understand that the library collections that they're building, while in the past, as Jay said, they would build it kind of just in time, and we would use subject specialists, collection development. Collection development has really evolved. Past when librarians would really curate specific collections and hope that, I used to work with one librarian who had a particular collection of some kind of literature, and she said, oh, yeah, we haven't had a book checked out in 10 years, but, don't worry, that author's day will come again, and we're ready, just in case anyone, wants to check out this stuff. It was like a rare G.K. Chesterton collection or something like that. They don't collect that way anymore. They really need to know that the money they are spending, that the collections they are building are having value now in real time for the academic disciplines and scholars that they need to support. So they need to have mechanisms like these PDA and DDA capable systems that allow for instant delivery of approved content that was formerly outside the collections realm.
Right.
So, so we're seeing a complete shift. This is why we're talking about this today, because the complete way that search, discovery, and building collections is evolving. So.
Yeah, exactly. And, I think it's important, although we're seeing a shift, it's important to note that all of the old models are still with us and will be so. And that's really what's contributing to the complexity is there's just more that we need to anticipate. So we don't have the luxury of ignoring the past, but we do have the requirement of anticipating the future. And so hopefully we can give you some information to do so and some solutions that may be helpful. But ultimately, what I want to leave you with is the way libraries are making purchase decisions is really changing, and descriptive data content is at the heart of adapting to those changes. So there's a lot of terms tossed around about searching and search discovery platforms in the market right now. We've heard everything from a search engine to federated search, meta search. The real buzzword that folks interested in this kind of technology are using these days is web-scale discovery services. And these are really systems that have been meant to compete with the Google-like experience, except have it limited to library-appropriate resources. And I say library-appropriate because in some cases it's things, as I said, that have been purchased by the library. In other cases, they are things that the library would purchase but hasn't yet. There is still this front-end filtering mechanism where librarians are limiting what can be chosen by patrons for requested purchase, just to ensure that no real mistakes can be made. But there's so much out there in the available that librarians are opting for a model where they can put the final decision to the patron to choose among a host of good options, to take advantage of their limited budget in the most efficient way possible. And that's really part of the point, is that more than ever, metrics are really coming into play with respect to how content is evaluated in terms of value. So driving use is an absolute must at this point, because librarians have a much clearer view of how things circulate from their collections, and the whole point there is without that exposure within search, we're going to find ourselves in a situation where content doesn't appear to users and isn't found and might as well be invisible, really. So improving search and discovery has always really been the motivation behind innovation, and we've seen it improve. It's pretty easy to see how an online catalog is better than a card catalog. But this latest generation of search tools, this web-scale discovery services, they really are something different. And I want to give you a definition for what they are. The pre-harvested central index coupled with richly featured discovery layer, providing a single search across the library's local open access and subscription collections. Again, this is really meant to provide those users with a tailored, customized consumer search engine type experience when they're looking for content to support their research. And we'd love to tell you how these systems work. We don't know. So just like the commercial search engines or the consumer-based search engines, the web-scale discovery services are based on proprietary search algorithms. So we don't know exactly what is elevating a particular title in a particular system's search results, but we can offer some suggestions, and I will do so, about how to structure data to ensure that you stand out from other offerings that may be included in the same index. So the next generation of discovery platforms are being created and sold by the four following main players. There are others out there, but in the scholarly works world, it's really Ex Libris, OCLC, Serial Solutions, now a ProQuest company and brand, and EBSCO. And we'll mention a couple of instances specific to these companies where we've seen change happen in a very real way. But again, this is not just another search, and it supports a new model of purchasing, this demand-driven, or the PDA DDA stands for patron-driven acquisitions and demand-driven acquisitions. You will see these acronyms in industry literature. They are interchangeable. It's just a matter of preference of what people want to call it, the DDA, demand-driven, and PDA being patron-driven acquisitions. These are models that were experimented actually before the technology was there to support it. The idea was there to say, we're being judged, more and more librarians are being judged on whether or not the content that is purchased is circulating. And the idea of creating a patron-driven model ensured at least one use of a particular item. And that may not sound like a lot, but there was a good deal of analysis that came out about a decade ago and has held up over time and scrutiny that shows a huge percentage of resources purchased by libraries are never used. And there's been a shift in the library world of more libraries are being administrated by non-librarians and more business administration type folks who are sharpening their pencils with respect to buying things that actually generate a usage statistic. So this, the other main thing to remember about this is that this is real. This isn't something that is just coming and we think that it might happen. We've already seen 400 to 600 libraries worldwide switch to a patron-driven model in one form or another. And the research that we've done shows that that number is likely to double over the next year. So this is a model that has been experimented with and thought about for a long time, and once it started going into practice, the first implementations were with ebooks and very quickly moved to all forms of content purchased by the library. In some cases, for very expensive items, it's the decision is fed out to faculty members, not to patrons, but there are different iterations of this, but it's a very real phenomenon and it's something that can be addressed with well-structured content-level descriptions and data. So while we can't tell you how the black box works, how the search box works, and how data should be applied in the absolute best way, it's likely different for different search engines. There are common denominators for success. And the basics have to be covered. What I've included here is right from the BIC standard. And it's very simple pieces of metadata. But you'd be surprised how many publishers don't include all of these elements and what effect that can actually have on sales of those items. So title, author, format, ISBN, things you would normally associate are at the absolute base minimum, but more is better. And that data really does correlate to sales. So the titles, the information on this slide comes from a study that I would encourage everyone to take a look at. It was produced internally by Nielsen and available for free on their website. But it's very compelling, and this is just one manifestation of results that have been replicated by others doing similar research. But I have a high degree of confidence in the Nielsen output, so that's why I reference it here. But the titles that have met the BIC basic standard within their database see sales 98% higher than those that don't meet the basic standard. That's just one way to measure it. Just by having the very most basic metadata and having it complete can nearly double sales. Records with a complete BIC basic data but have no image, no cover image, which, people might not think of that as a piece of metadata, but it certainly is. It describes the book. In this case, we're talking about a book. Could also apply to a database entry or a journal entry, but having a cover image has a big effect on users' decision to push the yes, I want this button. So much so about 473% higher, actually, just having an image associated with a record. And the difference in average sales between records which don't have enhanced metadata and records which do can be almost 7 times. And by enhanced metadata, this is where I'm talking about things that go well beyond that basic standard. Things like a narrative description, a abstract, or a monograph, which is something we normally associate with a journal. but a description of the content that is both brief and can be read by a person in less than a minute, that tells you something about the book, not necessarily qualitative, but just objectively descriptive, can have a massive impact on whether or not a user is inclined to go further upon discovering that resource. So something on this section.
Jay,
absolutely.
Can you just define what the BIC standard is?
The BIC standard is it's a metadata standard that's used much more in Europe than it is here in North America. But it is the standard to which Nielsen, for example, asks that books be adhered to. And there is there's lots of web resources. In fact, I've got a list of resources that we can attach to this presentation when we send it around to everyone that provides links into those that would not only provide a detailed description of whatever of the standard, not just BIC, but others, that can also provide the schema, the actual data schema behind it, including appropriate standard values that would be expected to populate the fields for.
Oh, let's definitely include that for everyone. We also did have a quick question on the side. The previous slide, we mentioned imprint as one of the data elements you always want to be sure to include. Imprint and publisher, sometimes those are synonymous. Imprints are usually a subsidiary, or they define a specific collection that's handled by a particular publisher. But of course, you'd want to have both the publisher and any applicable imprints in your data set for a particular work, just to clear that up.
Right. Well, and so imprints really also is specific to books, monographs for the most part, publishers. So CRC, for example, is an imprint of Taylor and Francis. They operate very much independently, however, they are an imprint of. And it's important to have that whole line of the ownership of the title detailed.
Provenance, yeah.
Exactly, the provenance form. So on this state, this is just an anecdotal quote that represents this larger shift that we're seeing in the market of a greater reliance on data to be the representation of your content in the marketplace. Portland State, for example, a local library here who is a member of the Orbis consortium that is comprised of 47 libraries, they are no longer using subject selectors to build print collections. They've moved completely to a demand-driven acquisition model for monographs. It's different with journals, but for monographs, every book that's going to be purchased will be selected by a patron, and no books will be purchased in advance. So this is very much a shift away from the old approval plan model that was supported by many book vendors to a internal resource crowdsourcing decisions to the actual user base, essentially. And we've heard similar statements about this from a lot of libraries, not just in the Orbis consortium, but OhioLink has begun working with this, and as many of you will know, it's one of the largest consortiums, and I think probably is the largest consortium in North America. The decision is so important to note because the technology to support this kind of model had to be adopted by the entire consortium. So in Orbis Cascades example, all 47 libraries have agreed to shift their technology away from their prior vendor and adopt Ex Libris Primo as their means of presenting bibliographic data to patrons. And again, that now is comprised of titles they own, so it's like the traditional library OPAC, online catalog, and works that they don't own or may potentially buy. And the facility to allow users to request titles and those requests to be moderated by library staff are all built in as part of the platform. Quickly moving on from this perspective of an important shift, I want to talk about a few current industry initiatives and specific to publication metadata. We'll be brief on this section, but there are some identifiers here that will be very familiar and should be. The list that I have here is a brief list of those identifiers that really are accessible to everyone. They're standards that are used. They're not proprietary. They're not closed off. They are accessible not only by publishers to apply, but for users to use in some meaningful way. some of them, arguably our industry in the production of scholarly works has relied on unique identifiers for a very long time, and the ISBN worked okay, especially in the print world. But as we've expanded the number of formats and the platforms on which those are available, other identifiers have become important, and most notably here probably the DOI and the ORCID ID. DOI allows for links to specific bits of content and is not a locked down type of identifier, meaning it's not like a URL to a web page that may or may not exist 10 years from now. It is an identifier for that particular piece of content that relies on another registry to enumerate all of the places where that particular piece of content might live on the web. So a particular journal article may live in 5 different places. However, users from a library may only have access to one of those sources. The DOI is the mechanism in combination with a knowledge base, for example, that points that user to the right place so that they get a positive result when they try to click on something they found. And it's very important. It's also, it got its life in the journal industry for articles and was quickly realized by many monograph publishers that it can also be applied not only at the book or at the title level, but also for chapters, where many publishers are experimenting with selling chapters and can identify those as discrete deliverables to the market. So very important to be aware of that and apply it wherever possible. Moving on, some important identifier initiatives that are in the market. ORCID ID, which we've talked about a little bit. This is often confused with ISNI, which I'll mention in just a second. And I can draw the distinction here for everyone from the content standpoint, in that ISNI is simply a bridge identifier. It is simply a unique number that can be mapped to a record within a system. And it applies to names. So it is the international standard name identifier. And it can be applied to names of people, real or imagined, institutions, etc. And it is just a number that gets applied, like an ISBN a little bit. ORCID IDs are different. It's a unique identifier for an individual that then ties into the large database of information that is maintained by ORCID. So it is supported by a database that has information about the author, about their publications, about their research grants, about patents they may hold. So there's a lot more information, but it is a very important way to identify an individual and then link to their body of work and the institutions that they've been associated with. A consortia advancing standards in research administration information, which is a very sort of UK-centric organization, has produced a report that I will include in the links that I encourage everyone on the call to look over. There'll be sections that are more interesting to some than others, and I don't know if you wanted to say anything about this report from your perspective. We've mentioned it before, Christine, but it goes into great detail about the importance of identifiers as applied to content. And rather than go into the details of the report in this presentation, I really wanted to simply mention it as something that should be research taken. You should be aware of it and take a look at it.
Right. Yeah. The CASA report came out last year, and I think most of the folks in this session were in the session a couple of weeks ago where we really went into a bit of detail on it. The ascension points from that report were that, it's more important. They recommended that it's more important than ever to include institutional identifiers. They were speaking specifically about institutional identifiers, in any metadata that is transmitted through the scholarly supply chain. They also realized that there were about, 25 or 30 different identifiers that were just at play in the UK scholarly system. So they've made some recommendations as to ones that are, meet more utilitarian criteria than others and things like that. But I think the point here is that identifiers, unique identifiers as they relate to individuals, to institutions, and to pieces of content themselves, all that are key to the scholarly supply chain are becoming more important to making that supply chain work. We're just swapping more data than ever around about institutions, our clients, the libraries we work with, and about the works and the content themselves. So anything that we can do to kind of properly structure and use unique identifiers in that big swap of data, will make our data kind of, as they taught us in kindergarten, play well with others, regardless of what those systems are. So this is really just to let you know that there are more and more identifiers out there, so it's definitely something to pay attention to as you start to structure your data more robustly.
And I skipped over the Book Industry Study Group bullet point about an international taxonomy of subjects. They're calling it the THEMA standard. And this is something that's really just still getting going on some level, but it's the idea is important to everyone to be aware of, in that subject taxonomies are one of the areas where it's easy to either misclassify something or just leave it off. And one of the things that has contributed to that is there hasn't really been a good international standard. Some libraries, academic libraries in Europe, will use Dewey, for example. In the United States, only public libraries use Dewey. LC, Library of Congress, rather, classifications are used in North America more than other places. There just hasn't been a single place where we can say, this is the subject in which this work falls, and everyone in the world knows that. The Book Industry Study Group has taken a stab at trying to overcome that problem, which would be great. It'll make life for folks like us more complicated, because we'll have to map existing subject taxonomies to a new international standard, but it would be great to have a globally accepted standard for subjects that we can target, because subjects really are the basis on which many buyers will take the first slice of data and sort it out by it and evaluate content by. So you want to be sure if something isn't a relevant subject that's being picked up in that process. So these are things to really kind of take a look at later. I put FundRef on here at the end simply because I think it's something, Crossref is really the organization that gave life to the DOI using their ability to maintain a registry of the places where those deliverables live, but they have taken on the idea of creating a database of funders for research that it's going to be populated with ORCID IDs and Ringgold IDs, and it would appear that that database is going to get a large influx of data from a major U.S. Or a major global publisher in the near future. But we can kind of talk about that on an individual basis offline for those of you that are interested. So some strategies and pitfalls about how to handle your data. So some practical advice about what to do and not do with your data. We did feel like we wanted to give you some ideas of things that we've learned and what we've been told by our publishing partners to always keep in mind. So I've already said it, but of course I'm going to say it probably again, and that is to create the most complete metadata possible. Create very complete descriptions and any fields that are available that can be populated in a reasonable way as part of your workflow should be. As I said earlier, more data is better. It's a basic rule. You certainly want to distribute widely and efficiently. There are a lot of systems out there that do a good job for publishers in terms of document digital asset management systems or document management systems that allow you to put metadata or associate metadata with a particular title and then output that to multiple sources. However, that data may not go as far as folks that you might, as far as you might think, because much of it is duplicate data that is out in the supply chain, overlaps, gets tossed because single records are being created, and if there's nothing unique in a particular record, it may not be included. There are some solutions to that we'll talk about later about how to get unique and important data about your titles into systems that aren't directly accessible by publishers. And that's part of that idea of promoting. It's not really advertising, but it is a technical representation of a published work presented in a way that will increase sales. An adherence to standards, of course, it wouldn't be a Ringgold presentation if we didn't champion standards and unique identifiers. So uniquely describe each manifestation of a work, meaning an ebook on one platform should have a different EISBN than the same work on another platform. So not just a separate ISBN for print versus e, but for every edition of that book that's available to be consumed should be uniquely described using an identifier. And develop an internal policy to create uniform data across all published works. So in addition to completeness, consistency is very important to many of the systems that will ingest data about your titles. They use loading programs that look for consistency and rank data quality based on whether or not it is complete. I'm using air quotes, which you can't see right now, but it's important to be sure that your standard, whatever you decide is right for your content in terms of descriptions, is applied to everything possible. So some tactics, some practical tactics. We encourage every publisher to require authors to establish an ORCID profile and use that ORCID ID when that author is mentioned as part of the metadata for a particular piece of content. Create links into the content. The more specific, the better, meaning DOI. If you can link down to the chapter level, be well served by that. Develop concise descriptions of content. This is not jacket copy. Again, this is really the service that's provided by Ringgold through ProtoView, which we'll mention at the end. Being able to create something that is what we found. We did a lot of research, and what we found is 250 to 300 words presented in a objective, descriptive way. Book News used to call them reviews, but they're not really reviews. They are they're not qualitative. They are descriptions that are objective and presented to users as a means of getting a sense beyond the basic bibliographic information of what it is they're looking at. And this has a massive impact on a user's decision to acquire that content.
It's really like an abstract for at the book or title level.
Exactly. And while we're happy to work with journal content, there's really not really a need to create a journal or an article level abstract. Those already exist and are often so complex that they need to be created by the author. But there are other ways in which the journal itself can be described within the supply chain to increase its visibility. So include as much as practical. Abstracts for chapters are another great way to increase the incidence of keywords that get populated into the discovery systems. And often there is a brief chapter description, which should be shorter than the book level abstract. But those are often written by the authors. And if those can be included within the metadata outbound from the publisher, that's a smart thing to do. Apply unique identifiers. We talk about this all the time, but this is to really establish longevity of the metadata in the supply chain. When we create records, they live there for a long time, as we said. The identifiers allow the systems to expose that information to users throughout the life of the title, which could be outlive us all probably. And then evaluate the benefits of working with outside partners to help you do what isn't practical inside, or to overcome some of the limitations to how far you can syndicate information about your titles. There are some ways to work within the industry level systems that are out there using partners like Ringgold that are probably better or simply not available to publishers directly. So some pitfalls, some things to watch out for, and I'll go through this quickly. We're 10 minutes off of the hour, and I want to be conscious of everyone's time, but we're nearly to the point where we can talk a little bit about Ringgold's answer to some of these changes, but a few slides about things to not do. So a pitfall is using non-standardized naming conventions. This is a pretty obvious one. Many Identify customers are going to understand the problem with having the same person with multiple names in your systems. A good solution here is to require authors to use an ORCID ID and include that wherever possible in your systems, just as the quickest way to disambiguate And example 2, lack of affiliations between authors and institutional customers. This is solved by using either the Ringgold or the ISNI number, and I'd love to go into more detail about ISNI and Ringgold and the relationship there, but either will work for this. An inability to link authors and customer data together, again, using a unique identifier that disambiguates between who you're talking about, whether it's a customer or an author, is the right route to go to overcome this problem of poorly associated data in the supply chain. So another area to look out for is the lack of inadequate subject classifications and keywords. I touched earlier on the importance of subject classifications, and it's a tricky thing because there isn't an international standard to adhere to right now. But nonetheless, subject classifications are an important thing to include, and by including them regardless, as long as they're adhering to some standard, will in future be mappable to a global standard once it's available. But the problem with not having the right subject classifications or keywords is poor positioning in search results and missed sales. So our first example, applying non-standard subject classifications doesn't match up with what the market expects to see. And using standards, be it LC or DUI or whatever, use something as a best practice to describing the area in which your content falls. Subjects applied without an international standard or cross-discipline keywords are lacking. This is the problem of expanding what we think about when we're describing something to apply in different regional locations. So football in the United States does not mean the same thing as football in Europe, obviously.
And most of us have global customer bases for our products, so it's really important to think about this.
And one of the ways where we can use standard classifications as a stopgap until we have an international standard to adhere to. Another way to help overcome this problem is include rich keywords and abstracts, which are indexed by the search layer and allow you to get a hit against soccer, for example, rather than football. So another pitfall, lack of clarity regarding formats and versions. This is a problem that started the minute ebooks came on the scene and hasn't gone away yet. What happens is there's confusion within sales channels and even among distributors and agents. What happens, what we've seen some examples are users fail to find a compatible format because the ISBN hasn't been applied appropriately. So this is the worst case scenario. If someone applies the ISBN that was used for a print title to an ebook, that's just a death sentence for the ebook. The systems that index both will simply throw out the duplicate ISBN, and once metadata is corrupted like that, it's really tough to get it back. Citations are incorrect or inconsistent. There's ways to apply version-specific pagination. EPUB 3 has a new standard for electronic books that allows you to lock down the pagination if that's a route you want to go to overcome the problem of the wrong page number, depending on what size font you use to display the title. Links to content fail over time. Apply DOIs to establish that persistent, reliable link. Again, it relies on a registry that can be maintained to point users to the right resource, and if that resource changes, the DOIs don't have to be changed. They live within the work, they live in the content out in the world, but where that link points to can be changed by administrating the registry. The data is not fully utilized or indexed by discovery systems, and this is, again, not only should the data itself be unique and unambiguous and adherent to standards, but the way in which it's packaged and submitted to the supply chain should also be standardized, and many publishers do a good job of using something like Onyx to solve this problem. So with that overview and perspective of the changes and why it's really important, I want to talk a little bit about ProtoView. And Gene, you can feel free to jump in at any time. We're down to just about 5 minutes, so we'll make this quick. We've touched on ProtoView in the past. I'm particularly excited this week because we've made a major announcement to over 800 publishers that use our services, those that had supplied material to book news traditionally, that ProtoView is now up and running. ProtoView.com is up and running, and the service is full-blown and full release. So we're very proud to make that announcement. But this is really about using data to power discovery and how we've adapted our services to meet the changing market and hopefully take some burden off of our publishing suppliers and customers so that you don't have to worry about all of this. We're trying to worry about it for you. What it is, and it's not just books, but it's a service that creates and disseminates publication metadata on behalf of scholarly publishers. We'll talk a little bit more about that. But developed from a successful model as the next generation. This is, it's why we bought Book News. And I often like to say Book News got lucky and Ringgold got smart. Book News had continued to do the same thing for 35 years, creating a really good brief record with a descriptive, professionally written abstract of a title that was valued by librarians when they're evaluating titles. And Ringgold saw that as the perfect place to start building a service that would incorporate more types of formats, not just books, not just print books, but ebooks, databases, journals, and to disseminate that information in a way that populates systems that wouldn't otherwise be accessible to publishers. And of course, we take our own message on board, and we always adhere to the industry best practices and apply standards wherever possible. And again, this is where we talk about providing promotional services for publishers. This is really promotion in the sense of populating relevant systems for discovery, purchase, and use, using a service that extends a publisher's capabilities. In other words, we can populate these systems with data that a publisher cannot. This is what it really looks like in the supply chain. Metadata comes into us from the publisher. We use whatever we can get as the basis and then add to it. We enhance that book metadata. We create content summaries. We can do this for multiple things, not just books. And then we put that out to the discovery services licensees, librarians, and researchers in a way that can be consumed efficiently and effectively. So a few screenshots from ProtoView, quickly just to give you an idea of the kind of information that we include. There's a lot here. This is an ebook bibliographic record. You'll see it includes a cover image. It's got an awful lot of information here that was provided by Bloomsbury and then codified into this structure by ProtoView. We created an abstract for the title. We mentioned alternate formats. This is exposing any other edition that a user might be interested in looking at. You can click through to that. Chapter information. All of this information is indexed by search engines. Just like increasing the likelihood of a title to get used. I always think of when I worked at Blackwell and we offered a table of content enrichment service, just the inclusion of title headings for chapters increased the usage or the circulation of a particular title by 4 or 5 times, just having that additional information there. So we go through and apply whatever subjects we can get our hands on. Again, this goes back to not having an international standard. We apply our own subjects. We use Library of Congress subjects, any publisher-specific subjects that have been provided, etc. More is better, and if we keep it on file, then we will be in a better position to map this accurately to a global standard once it's available. We then provide a view of the more detailed metadata. There's a lot here, and I'll just move on quickly, but we have taken great care to identify every way in which a piece of content can be described and create a means to capture and disseminate that information. And then a publisher-specific information, we've linked the ProtoView database with the Identifier database to bring in information specific to institutions like publishers, including the Ringgold number. You can see here Bloomsbury Publishing Incorporated has a Ringgold number associated with their record and external links to the publisher's website as part of the service. And what we're trying to do is really bridge that gap between data and discovery. So we have developed the first service that combines standard identifiers and descriptive metadata. So well-structured, unique identifiers coupled with abstract summaries of a title is the best recommendation we can give for getting titles exposed in what's really becoming an ocean of content in the market. And I should say on that last bullet point here, this is when I've mentioned this a couple of times about systems that are inaccessible otherwise. We work with partners, and I'll end this with a list of some of those, like YBP's Gobi platform. Well, YBP is owned by Baker & Taylor. Baker & Taylor licenses data from ProtoView, includes it in Gobi, which is the acquisitions platform for librarians provided by YBP. and they have shared with us that, one, they don't accept publisher-created descriptions of work, and two, that those titles within the Gobi database that carry an abstract summary sell at 4 to 5.5 times what titles that don't carry an abstract sell. So they value it very much in terms of helping sell books on behalf of publishers. So some of the things that we offer, these are just the features of the service: rapid professional production of enhanced metadata, meaning unlike a review, which they used to be called, which usually occurs many months after the publication of a title, we do this as close to publication as possible to get that data off to a good start in life, so to speak. And we'll apply it to print or ebooks, journals, and online content. We have a link to the supply chain that I mentioned with the example of Gobi, that is a really large-scale dissemination that is a very specialized professional means of putting your data into the systems that matter most. We're very flexible, so we can use what metadata you're already creating as the basis for the record, and we can include any degree of data that you want, or just the basics, if that's the route you want to go. So a lot of flexibility in what we can do for your content. And then a multi-channel approach to end users. We deliver it as quickly as we possibly can to the discovery services. Our services are repackaged by library service companies. ProQuest, for example, sells our data in a form that can be consumed by libraries and populate online catalogs with. We've created our own web interface, but we will always rely on partners like ProQuest and EBSCO to get the data out there. We could never hope to have as many people using our dedicated website as they're able to reach with their very large dedicated sales team. So they're much valued partners in helping us promote scholarly works on behalf of publishers. But for those users that do subscribe to our service directly, we've created automatic alerting, much like a new title alerting service that will alert them to titles in subject areas of interest by email. So some of the metadata that includes for books, again, I won't go into this. We're right up against our time. You can kind of imagine some of the things that we will send along the slide deck to everyone for your review, and we're happy to work with you to talk about data elements or any questions you have individually. And then some of our licensees, we've conservatively said that these resources are used in 75% of U.S. college libraries. That's a hedge on not having a real number to share with you. We think it's much higher than that, but we know that it's at least 75%. We're doing everything we can to fill the corners of the deep web used by our industry for discovery and acquisitions of titles, and we'll continue to do so. And as I said earlier, we rely on our partners since they really have the people making the decision about what to buy, sitting in front of their interfaces. Populating those interfaces is absolutely core to our mission to increasing the profile of your scholarly works into the supply chain. And that brings this presentation to an end. I don't see any more questions coming through privately on chat, Christine, but if there's any questions now, this would be a great time to bring them up. Otherwise, I do understand everyone's schedule and want to be respectful of that.
There was one question that came in, Jay, that I thought was interesting, and we talked a lot about PDA and DDA becoming much more prevalent for books, obviously. How do we know, how is that stacking up for journals? Did the report you noted have any information on that?
I didn't look at it from a specific from the journal perspective, and Nielsen didn't treat the study that I referenced. Nielsen doesn't treat journals specifically, but what I can say about journals is, being a subscription-based product, it isn't really up for patron-driven acquisition in many of the same ways that books might be. What we have seen, however, is the decision to renew is based on these metrics that are being created by the usage of particular.
That was kind of my take as well, is that, journal subscriptions and database subscriptions are, the collection development decision is made differently. It's a higher kind of threshold. Do we want to purchase it? Do we not? Versus a book that might be, $100 or something. These are different kinds of things that you can put into the hands of patients. But the need for the metrics-based, usage is becoming a more and more prevalent
it's absolutely
factor in renewal.
Yeah, it's critical. And what we're seeing is, and I mean, I can mention some people by name. My good friend Phil Davis, who writes for the Scholarly Kitchen, did quite a bit of work with respect to using usage data, circulation data as a basis for making decisions to review the subscription roles for a particular institution. And R2, a consulting firm that many of you are probably familiar with, really jumped on that and provided a service that would go in and analyze usage data coming out of libraries and make specific recommendations of what journals should not be renewed, to go in and try and use the budget more effectively. So these usage statistics begin to take on a very sort of cold-hearted approach to whether or not something is going to enjoy a renewal, and very important for us to drive positive results in those metrics as a result. I do see a question here. I'll just read it as I said. You said more data is better. Okay. So the question is, could you comment on when more is not necessarily better? When would the amount of data be too much for user interaction? And I think that this is a great question. You're right. The different interfaces use data differently. So what can be produced by a publisher and provided downstream into the supply chain really depends on the target that it's going to hit. From our standpoint, more is better so that when we target systems, we have a superset of data that can be delivered depending on what that particular system that we're targeting requires. So in the case of B&T, for example, they use our data in different ways. But for YBP, they already have very good metadata for individual titles. So what they're really interested in using and where the real value comes from is from that abstract, because it is something that they can't get anywhere else. And it provides an ability to further populate their search engine with keywords and with relevant terms coming from that abstract. In other cases, the discovery layers that we've seen really have a need for as much data as possible. They may display it to the user in a way that looks more streamlined or straightforward, but those identifiers linking, to institutions, to individuals, are playing a role in the background to how results are rendered and presented to users. So it's really tough to say when is more data not a good thing. In the case of when you're trying to elevate content within computerized search mechanisms, more is never going to hurt you. There comes a point to where more isn't practical. But I think that actually is something that becomes specific to genre, to caliber of publication, et cetera, too. Okay, so, and again, we're happy to speak with anyone. We've had a number of people leave the call, so kind of winding down here, remind everybody that in 2 weeks we have a 30-minute session to just quick tips for better customer data to be created within your systems. We encourage you to register and join us for that. And in the meantime, you can contact myself or Jean about anything related to content level descriptive data and the services offered by Ringgold. And again, we'll send this slide deck around everyone so you have a copy of it. And we'll get those links in there too, right, Christine? So.
Yeah, we can absolutely do that. So thank you, everyone, for attending this afternoon. And again, give us a call or email us if you have any questions that bubble up, but we will be sending the slide deck around in the next day or so.
Thank you so much, everyone. Good day.
Thanks. Have a good afternoon. Bye-bye now.